pleased to be here with you all this morning. So I'm hoping you can tell that I'm not a grandparent yet, thankfully, as my oldest child is just 15. Though I have been blessed with wonderful grandparents, and I've also seen the critical role of my parents and my husband's parents in the lives of our children. And this subject is particularly near and dear to me and my heart this week, as I lost my last living grandparent last Wednesday. Betty Furan, who lived at Whitefish of the Lakes. She was 98 and a half. And just a lovely woman, and I miss her dearly already. So I'm thankful, and the timing is nice for me to share on this topic. Right. I'm going to try to advance. There we go. Okay. So by a show of hands, who here is a grandparent? I shouldn't put mine up. Okay. Who here believes that the relationship between grandparents and grandchildren is important for the grandparents' health and well-being? Yeah. Okay. Who here believes that it's also important for the health and well-being of the grandchild? Indeed, right? Well, it turns out that this is true, right? I love it when research makes sense. There is empirical research supporting the importance of this relationship. And in fact, bidirectionally, that it's important for both parties in their mental health. So there was a longitudinal study at Boston College that followed more than 700 grandparents and grandchildren from 1985 to 2004. And that study found that both grandparents and adult grandchildren who felt close emotionally to the other generation had fewer symptoms of depression. Studies show also that emotional closeness between these parties not only protects against depression, but also boosts brain function and leads to a longer life. So these are good things. What was that?
Can you tilt that a little more so I can read your lips? I can't understand you all the time.
Tilt this?
No, the laptop.
Oh, okay, sure. Let's see. Maybe I pull it down. Can you see me a bit more? Is that better? I need like a little stool or something. I should have worn heels. Okay, is that better though?
It's better.
Okay, yeah. Maybe I can go back a little bit further. Okay. So being close, right, to the grands, bidirectionally, is important for the well-being for all. We've established that. So there was another study in 2009 that found that adolescent grandchildren who felt close to their grandparents had fewer negative mental health symptoms than those who did not feel close to their grandparents. The greater grandparent involvement was also associated with fewer emotional problems, especially this was the case in step families or in single-parent families. Another study in 2004 found that the more frequently grandparents and young grandchildren had contact, so the more frequently they had contact, the more satisfied grandparents were in their relationships. And those who were competent, who felt competent and happy in their role of grandparents, had better emotional well-being as well. And a final study here found that grandparents who consistently give positive support and some material gifts to their grandchildren had better psychological health than those who did not. So for grandchildren, the biggest gift of all, this all-important bond, is the endless supply of love, acceptance, patience, and unwavering support that grandparents uniquely have to offer. And in healthy relationships, grandkids can find their grandparents a safe harbor in life and the stressors of life, someone that they can trust and they know is always on their side. This extra layer of support can have lasting positive effects on a child's emotional well-being into their adulthood. And for grandparents, grandparenting can help to restore your energy, your optimism, youthfulness, and a sense of purpose in life. According to the American Grandparents Association, 72% of grandparents believe that being a grandparent is the single most important factor and satisfying thing in their life. It's a pretty important finding. Okay. So some further studies, or lots of studies on this, which is exciting. A 2006 study found that when a parent struggles with depression, a positive bond with grandparents can protect against similar depression in the child. But unfortunately, it was also found that when a teenager's mother had depression, a poorer grandparent-grandchild connection was more likely, as was subsequent depression in the grandchild. So thus, the findings of this would suggest that a teenager whose mother has depression would do well to maintain a strong relationship with their grandparents, and also that a grandparent whose adult child has depression, they would do well to put in extra effort to offer emotional support to their grandchild. That would be a protective factor. So all of these studies drive home one very clear message, that grandparents and grandchildren can be valuable resources to one another in protecting each other's health and emotional well-being. So I found an article that listed 5 key reasons why grandparents are so important. How many here would say that grandparents can truly impact their grandchildren's lives? Right? Probably all of us, right? So studies show that as many as 9 out of 10 adult grandchildren feel that their grandparents influence their beliefs and values. Grandparents are also some of the best partners when it comes to using creativity and imagination to discover the wonders of life, which can help to reduce day-to-day stressors and household stress experienced by parents and grandchildren. Grandparents also bring an incredible amount of experience, right? And what comes with experience? Wisdom, right? Grandparents are a valuable resource because they have so many stories and life experiences to share. And it's found that oftentimes children will listen or even confide in their grandparents when they may not be listening to their own parents or confiding in their parents or other adults. Children also understand more about who they are and where they came from, right? When they have this connection and close bond with their grandparents. Grandparents can also provide a sense of security, especially during tough times. Again, having that extra layer of support can make all the difference in a child's life. They can offer that extra ear when children need someone to talk to. And lastly, if they are willing and able, having a grandparent serve as an occasional babysitter or a paid childcare provider can give parents a great sense of comfort in knowing that they're leaving their children in capable hands and loving hands. So let's talk a bit about the many roles of grandparents. There are obviously a variety of them. I've listed several here. So by a show of hands, who here would identify as the role of historian for your grandchildren? You share kind of history, important history. Yeah, I was just going through my grandmother's things as we were cleaning out her apartment, and I came across her yearbook from 1941. And there in the front cover was this paper, right, that said Pearl Harbor had been bombed. And I thought, wow, she lived through this experience. She was just stepping into through the threshold into her adulthood. And this occurred, and my grandfather, her husband, served in the war in Europe. And I think, wow, we can learn, right, from textbooks, we can learn from, our teachers, right? But we can really learn from those who went through those things themselves, those experiences directly. How about the role of nurturer? Who here would identify with that? Or when you think of your own grandparents as a source of nurturance, right? Absolutely, yeah. Mentor or teacher, right? Yes. Playmate? Sometimes grandfathers. I see more grandfathers raise their hands. They kind of play with their grandchildren, right? Okay. It's also a way for children to learn through play. Role model, right? Role model, a spiritual guide, a caregiver, and also a student. How about a student? Learning from your grandchildren as well, right? So there are many roles that grandparents can play. So working out your role, you might ask yourself and do some reflection, what sort of grandparent would you like to be, or are you? What are the needs of the family? What are the needs of the parent? And that can change, of course, over time as well. Some other factors, how much time do you realistically have? Sometimes that's based on proximity and where you're living. What are you willing and able to do, etc.? Right? Oh, keep clicking here. So there are a number of factors that affect the relationship between grandparents and grandchildren. I've listed a few of them here. So not surprisingly, physical proximity is a relevant factor. So geographic closeness is one of the strongest predictors of a close relationship between grandparents and grandchildren. And although there's no real substitute, right, for face-to-face interaction, technology, right, can help us, of course, and through COVID in particular, I know people were not as close and used technology to stay in touch with one another. This does make it easier. Also, when you think about your older grandchildren, does anybody here use social media to connect, or texting, an occasional loving text message, right? I feel like I can connect with my children sometimes better through those means. They respond sometimes, right? If you send them a little funny message or something, they appreciate that. Frequency of contact, as we mentioned, is also correlated with emotional closeness, so having regular contact is important. Research shows that regular presence of grandparents is more important in promoting a close bond than the specific functions that the grandparent is performing. So it's really about that frequency of contact, regular presence. Families also that expect strong relationships between the generations and create a sense of normalcy in that way for those connections tend to have closer connections, right? And through the years as well. So grandparents who establish early emotional bonds with their grandchildren will usually find that those withstand the test of time and go into adulthood for those grandchildren. Grandchildren also usually develop their early values from their parents and grandchildren. So families are closest when they share values, right? But few families will ever be in total agreement. So when we find that there's a gap, perhaps, across the generations, many would advise that grandparents shouldn't abandon their values, though a willingness to listen as well to the younger generation can go a long way, especially in promoting that closeness with your grandchild. There are some challenges I'll just briefly mention here. Of course, family conflict. If there are past issues between parents and grandparents that can, kind of roll down, let's say, to grandchildren and create some distance as well, which can be heartbreaking. If you, as a grandparent, know what caused family conflict or perhaps a breach, you want to take some time to evaluate those circumstances and do whatever you can to restore relations, to maintain that relationship with your grandchild as well. Family counseling can be beneficial. I certainly see families in these kinds of situations sometimes. It's important to let your good intentions be known and to try to stay in touch as much as you can through those circumstances. Parents and children of today face a very different world as well than those of the previous generation. Child rearing methods evolve, right? They have, as I've had children over the years, we get different information, right? So staying up to date, refreshing our skills and continuing to learn about new methods is also important. Divorce, of course, is another very difficult situation. There are some tips for grandparents if you're facing that. I think one of the most important ones is to not take sides, right? But to remain neutral and to try to recognize that the divorce is happening between the parents, not between, the grandparent and grandchild. And so trying to promote peace, is really important. Also offering, some practical needs or assistance can help. Making a meal, perhaps, lending a sympathetic ear. And sometimes, and perhaps the most difficult situation, is when grandparents are tasked with raising their grandchildren, right? Perhaps due to the death of a parent or addiction issues, incarceration, illness, or job situations. And so this is, some of the most difficult circumstances. There might be legal issues or financial issues and emotional strain on all parties. And so oftentimes, on the flip side, there can be some positive. I have some children who are, as clients, who are in those situations who say, I have such a close relationship with my grandparent that I wouldn't otherwise have had. So there can be some positives as well. Grandparent responsibilities, and I know I'm at the end of my time, so I'm getting close. We talk some about healthy boundaries. Here we go. So grandparents should do well to support parents in parenting, right? So this includes respecting their decisions and their guidelines, even if you don't agree with them, right? But there are some times when it's really important to intervene, right? Certainly if there are abusive situations that are happening, it's important to talk with your child or to involve other parties to ensure safety for your grandchildren. If you witness, unhealthy dynamics, maybe the parent is making comments that are really critical or perhaps potentially damaging to the child, and you witness this sort of thing, it's important to thoughtfully speak up. The parents may not realize the impact they're having. You also can offer support to your grandchild and perspective. And if you see a chronic pattern of that, I think encouraging the parent or your child to seek counseling is wise as well. Or if you see concerns about the child's habits in terms of their bedtime or food or screen times or these sorts of things, again, I think speaking up about that in a thoughtful way is important with your children. There are some guidelines that have been offered by the American Academy of Pediatrics on disciplining grandchildren, and they're listed here. So the first one and foremost is to establish a positive, supportive, and loving relationship with your grandchild. Avoiding physical punishment, but instead, using positive reinforcement, right? So praise and rewarding behaviors that you want to see tends to increase, you're seeing those behaviors. Being patient, using a clear and even tone, clear language, using timeouts generally for younger children or removing privileges for older children. Those are generally what are recommended. So in closing, as a grandparent, you have so many gifts to share with your grandchildren, and this can have a profoundly positive impact on their lives, on their mental health, both in the present time and longer term, and also for yours. If you're a grandma or a grandpa, right, keep calling your grandchildren, inviting them to visit. Bring them thoughtful trinkets, take them on fun trips, give them hugs and kisses, right, and emotional support. It's good for both of you. And if you're a parent, right, take your children to see their grandparents, encourage them to stay in touch, to talk as often as possible, and do not minimize the importance of that relationship. and that source of support that they can provide in shaping your child. So thank you.